We're ready, Chris.
Almost there. All right, we're good.
Okay, welcome everybody. Adequate notice has been given, and we are going to just start real quick with the pledge to that that famous flag now, Sean, behind you. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands,
one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All righty. So just a reminder, this is really a special meeting. So it's kind of a one-topic meeting. So we're not going to do some of our normal stuff in terms of an update, things like that. So we are going to go right into our one and only study item, which is the Return to Learn plan. And Sean's going to give us a presentation, and then we'll have an opportunity to ask some questions. So Sean.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for having another meeting. Really, truly appreciate it. And this, like Joe said, this is different than another meeting. It's really a working session and different than a regular business meeting. A working session is an opportunity for us to have more of an informal type of given back and forth. I'm planning to give a presentation, and then there will be some time for you to ask some questions, ask any input that you might provide any input. So I do have a presentation to share, and I'm going to go ahead and start sharing. Okay. So can you guys see that okay? All right, good. So the point of this meeting is to give the board an overview of what our Return to Learn plan is right now, to give you some context about the next stages of our Return to Learn plan, and then to allow the board to ask some questions, as I said earlier, and just to check in. And I think that we're at a phase now that we've been looking at our secondary students, and want to talk a little bit more in depth about that. I do want to start off by saying that I'm realistic that any decision that I make is not going to be agreed upon by everyone, maybe not even by board members. And not every community member is going to be happy with every decision. But I do want to emphasize that I truly do make decisions that I feel are in the best interest of our students and our staff. And I want to make decisions that are informed. And so even though some people may not agree with them, I will always come back to and really do putting the heart of our decisions, our students and our staff. And as I have in the past, I hope people see that I will make tough decisions when I need to. And so I will just put that out there. But I do appreciate the support of the board and appreciate all the help and support you provided me over the last 7 months, 8 months as we have been in this pandemic. And again, everything is new because none of us have gone through this before. I do want to start off by just recognizing some few things that are some achievements. This pandemic was something that came at us very quickly in the spring, and we were able to pivot very, very quickly. We went into emergency remote learning and was able to do that for the rest of that year. I will say it didn't, as much as our teachers worked to make that the very best system possible, they needed some additional supports. We needed to look at what we were providing our students, and we changed and we adjusted and learned over the summer and started with a whole new plan at the beginning of this school year, which I'm very proud of. I think our teachers have done an amazing job. I think that people have been able to pivot very quickly and truly, truly appreciate that. I also think it's important to recognize that we have had, even though we've been in remote learning, we have had students in our building since the very first day of school. Last week, we recognized our special school district staff because they have been servicing our students since the very beginning of the school year. The other thing is that each of our schools have done things to see what students were in need. We have been able to provide services where students have been able to come in. It could be that they just needed some supervision for being online. It could be that they just needed some additional support, and we've been using our ancillary staff to be able to do that. The other thing is that we've been able to provide meals to our students throughout this whole time. We've had pickup at Captain, and now it's over at the high school. But our community has contributed to not only the academic and social emotional needs of our students, but also their physical needs. And so I think it's really important to recognize that as well. And then the other thing too is when you have a crisis like this, sometimes it actually causes the team to become stronger. And I will say that, and we have seen that people have become more unified. Our team has come together. And tonight I do have our central office team on this call just because there might be questions that they will help answer. So just wanted to start off by providing some context. So tonight I'm going to give an overview of our current reality and then talk a little bit about why we're making this decision about in-person learning. I will give you a little bit of insight of what's happening at the elementary level, what's going to look like at the secondary level, how we're making these decisions, and how these decisions will change. And I want to be really upfront with the board is that I have been trying to focus on leading this with hope and optimism, but sometimes the situation is changing on a daily basis. And I just want to be upfront with you is that even though I'm presenting these plans to you, even though we've sent some communication out to the community, even though our teachers have been learning about what this is going to look like, those plans might change still. Over the last few days, we've seen some differences in our data, and we have to be able to respond to that, and I might have to make some changes. So I will just be upfront with you as I show some of this data to you. I'm not as optimistic as I was, but I'm going to make sure that we're, again, looking at data to make this informed decision, and I will make the decision to change if needed. As I've shared with you at all of the meetings that we've given presentations to around about COVID, I have said that we've always had these guiding principles. We've kept the safety and health of our students at the center, students and staff at the center of our decisions. We're always looking at making sure we're providing high quality education. We're looking at the social emotional well-being of our students. We're looking at it through an equity lens, and then also being agile enough to make sure that we're changing. And we have had to be agile and have had to pivot a couple different times throughout this year to do what was best for our community. And as a reminder, our return to learn plan had two options. We had a responsive learning, which was allowing students to have in-person learning, but also would be also signing up for a hybrid or remote learning. So this was going to be our flexible model where, depending upon the data, depending upon the information that we had, students would be coming in and out of school. The learning at home was students making the choices to stay at home for the rest of the semester until January, and we would re-examine that. So we have continued to provide learning at home for our students. I wanted you just to kind of see some stats, and here are the number of students who are learning at home currently. 417 out of around 26, a little over 2,600. We have, that's about 16% of our staff, students. And then I wanted just to go into talking a little bit about our current reality. And our current reality is that this is our first pandemic. And being our first pandemic, this is tough for everyone. This isn't, I don't know of anyone who's not going through some hardship through this. And we're trying our very best to be responsive to the needs that are emerging. But we recognize that this not only affects people physically and with their health, but also emotionally. And so I am acknowledging that that is in our community, and I have to make sure that I'm being responsive to that. At this current time, we have our elementary and family center students in their buildings. Not all of our elementary. On On October 5th, we started with our kindergarten. And then on October 12th, we started with first and second grade. And what was really helpful is that we have had to, we've had orientations that were supportive of that, of getting people ready for that. On October 26th, we'll have our 3rd through 5th grade students joining the rest of their peers. And then that we've been able to do that for 5 days a week with all of our students. We've been able to do that because we looked at our buildings and saw that we were able to do social distancing within the classrooms, and also also being able to provide space for all the students who are in responsive learning. We're now at the phase where we're looking at our secondary students. And from the very beginning of this process, our goal was to get students back into school by the second quarter. And I said that since the very beginning, but also we were looking at making sure that we're monitoring data along that time. We've also gotten guidance from St. Louis County Health, who has been giving us recommendations, and their recommendations for us was to look at getting our secondary students into school. And that meant our middle and high school students. At this time, when we're looking at the space in our buildings, we are feeling that the best way to move forward with this is through a hybrid model. And people have different mental models about what hybrid means. It might mean alternating days. When we looked at a model for us, we wanted to make sure that we were having continuity of learning. We wanted to make sure that we were having students in schools each day. And we wanted to make sure that we were being able to keep those risk mitigation measures in place, such as social distancing. So we looked at a model for half days for our students, AM classes and PM classes. And then where our current reality too is that we're continuing to do our learning at home, even if we start back with our secondary students. What is the why behind this? We know that there are benefits to having in-person learning. We know that we are able to respond on the spot, being responsive in time with our students in a different way than it feels like for Zoom. And I know that our teachers still, with the challenge of doing it two-dimensionally, have been able to build relationships with students. They've been able to be responsive to students, but there isn't anything like being in person with our students. We're also able to get to know our students a little bit better. I know that at the secondary level, a lot of times we're teaching classes to blank screens. And then we're also knowing that we get to know our learners better. I talked to some of the elementary teachers who have already had students back in place, and they shared that some of the things they didn't know about their students until they actually started working with them and actually start in person and seeing how their thought process and the way that they were writing down things, and they were able to be more responsive to the needs of the students. I will have to say that I think that our teachers have done the very best that they could with the situation that we've had with remote learning, and we have continued learning in a high quality way. But there's nothing like being able to be in person with students. And I know some of our students have also said that they're looking forward to getting back. The other why behind this is because we have been very thoughtful about putting in risk mitigation measures. There are things that we're doing now that we didn't know about in the spring, and such as our face coverings, looking at filtration systems for our HVAC, making sure that we are teaching the right health promotion, hand hygiene systems, making sure that we are having the right cleaning materials in and new systems. So we feel very confident about our risk mitigation. And then the other thing is that we've been looking at data. And that data, there are multiple data points that we want to use. And the data that we've been using is from St. Louis County, but we're also aligning it with the CDC's guidelines for getting students back to school. And as I said to you before, earlier in this quarter, I was feeling really hopeful about the direction of the data that we were seeing, and felt like that data was supporting this decision and that recommendation by St. Louis County. So as I said before, when we're looking at data, we look at multiple data points. So we look at the number of new cases per 100,000 persons in the last 14 days. We're looking at the positivity rate in the region. We're also looking at what mitigation measures we're putting in place that are going to minimize the risk within our classrooms. And those are all indicators as part of our at the CDC guidelines. And then we also have here some data points that we want to share with you that shows some trends that made us, feel more optimistic about where we were going with this decision. And so I'm going to go a little bit. I'm going to go back one. So as you can see right here, you can see down here is the dates. It might be a little harder for you to see, but you can see that the trends were really high back then when we were looking in July. And that's when we started to make announcements about we were going to be in remote learning. And that was a decision that we made based off the data. As you can see, since then, the trends were going down. And what we want to do is we want to see trends that are below that level, where this level here, around the number of cases below 10. And so as you can see, these are different age groups, and I'll share this a little bit more. I'll go to the next slide. These are different age groups. So we have age groups that are going 0 to 5. And I don't know if my thing is blocking. Sorry. 0 to 5, and then 6 through 9, and then we have 14 to 19. 10 to 14, 14 to 19. And so what we're seeing here is we wanted to be at this line right here where it was below 10. So if we're looking at the number of new cases, below 20, I'm sorry. We wanted to be underneath this line right here. I hope you can see my cursor. Actually, I'm taking this back. I'm having a hard time seeing the chart right now because there we go. We wanted to be below this line right here. This is 20. And in the CDC guidelines, in order to be in the lower risk of transmission schools, the number of new cases has to be between 5 and less than 20. And this line right here is 20. As you can see, we were going down below that level. And we were excited to see that. And we started making decisions about where we wanted to go next. And so we started making decisions based off this data with the elementary level and started to get them in around the beginning of October. And then we started making decisions about the secondary. The thing that happened over the last few days is that we are starting to see a jump in the number of new cases per 100,000. The next chart will give a little bit more detail. You can see these green lines. These were some points where the county health started making some decisions and recommendations about which age groups we should start looking at and bringing them back into schools. It was very optimistic because, as I said, we wanted to see these numbers all to be below 20. When it's between 20 and 50, that gets into that moderate level. And so we were excited to see that we were seeing those trends. But unfortunately, you can see in this area with between 15 and 19, just to be upfront, is that we're seeing a trend that it's going up. Oops. It's going up. And the other thing is that we coupled it with the positivity rate in St. Louis County. And in order to be in that lower risk, we really wanted to be between 3 and 5. And the moderate risk is between 5 and 8. And so we were seeing that the trends were going down and going below 5. And they were at that borderline of where they were moderate and to lower risk. But now again, we're seeing throughout the county that it is changed. It has changed significantly even over the last couple of days, and now is beyond the moderate risk and actually is in the higher risk as of today. And so what's concerning to me is that we are seeing some trends in this data that they're getting higher for the 15 and 19-year-olds. They're actually getting higher at the lower levels as well, but they're getting to a point where they're getting to that point where it's higher than it goes beyond that lower risk and goes into that moderate risk. And then coupled with the positivity rate, it causes us to pause and say, do we need to make a different decision about our 15 to 19-year-olds? The one thing that we have been doing, though, is trying to say, what group of students are in that 15 and 19-year-olds. And so we have been working to try to get some additional data to say, is that 15 and the data here, is this more 18 and 19-year-olds, or is it more 15 to 17-year-olds? And so we've been able to disaggregate some of that data and get that from the county, but we don't have all of the accurate data yet. But our initial looking at that is that most of the cases were 18 and 19-year-olds, meaning that it could be students in the areas that are part of the universities. We're not sure, but we are looking into that a little bit closely. But I wanted to be upfront with you is that if we have the start date for our secondary schools on November 9th. If we're continuing to see trends, I am going to have to think about a different decision about this if I feel like it's getting to the point where those levels are going beyond that 20. As I shared with you too, is the CDC said that the way to also look at the data is to make sure that you're having the right risk mitigation measures in place. And we have done some things over the last 7 months to make sure that we have proper risk mitigation, such as social distancing within our classrooms, to buying barriers such as plexiglass and plastic barriers in our classrooms and in our offices. We're asking people to do self-screeners every day, making sure people are educated the reason why it's important for the screen the students every day. We had the new filtration systems put in place at all of our elementary schools and middle school and high school, and even the central office and the family center. We have new cleaning structures, and we're also doing things to have health promotion. So we're teaching students new strategies. I wanted to give you just an idea about what this looks like and had our communications department put a short video together so you can see what it's looking like currently in our elementary schools. So it kind of gives you a little snapshot of what it looks like. And I think we also have to be realistic is that it doesn't look like it used to in our classrooms. I mean, they are, the students are spread out. Our teachers are working to do their best job in terms of giving opportunities for students to collaborate. And so it is different. I don't think we can say realistically it's exactly the same as it was, but it is still in person and getting an opportunity for students to have that opportunity to work with their teacher directly and with other students in a way that's safe. Now what we're doing for secondary is that we have 2 draft schedules, and I wanted to make sure that you understood what the day would look like. And so Are you able to see a schedule? So I just wanted you to kind of see an idea. We would still have, we'd have students going on an A day would be the letters A through L would attend on 1 through 4 in the morning, and then we'd have M through Z that would do the same classes in the afternoon. So we'd have periods 1 through 4 in the morning, periods 1 through 4 in the afternoon, and then the next day we would be doing the same. And so for the other 4 classes. So the morning would go from 8:10 till about 11:25. We'd also have some time to, the Whiteout is really trying to make sure they're building in some time for their pack time, which has been very popular during the remote learning. And we're going to continue to do that. But we know that this is some of the challenges with this is transportation. And we're looking at some solutions for students that might be in need for that. And then we're also looking at ways to make sure that we are making sure that if there are some adjustments we need to make to certain classes because of maybe more students fall within a certain alphabet, we are making some adjustments at one end of the alphabet, we're making some adjustments. And then at the high school, it's a very similar schedule, but we also are making adjustments there as well, because there could be some things that we could do to keep kids in the afternoon if they're doing athletics, or if we're doing something special for students that have a certain circumstance where we want to keep siblings together, or siblings that have different last names. We want to make sure they're staying together. So we're trying to make as many accommodations as possible for families in this situation, realistically. In secondary change in schedule, so in remote learning right now, the students are doing about 130 minutes of asynchronous instruction. That is through Zoom. And so, and then they have about 10 to 20 minutes of independent work for each class. Then now for in-person, it's 114 minutes of in-person instruction, 30 minutes of independent for each class. So some might say, well, why are we going down to fewer instructional minutes? It actually is the quality of the minutes with students being in person is worth that reduction. It's about 15 minutes. And we also have to take into consideration, we have transition times, which takes up about 12 minutes in terms of having students go from class to class. And so even though it may look like it's a fewer minutes, we feel that those are high quality minutes that we're going to have with our students, and that it is worth that minor reduction with the transition time. The other thing is that there's a question about how are we addressing students who are learning at home? And so how are we, and also students that might be quarantined. The reality is that there will be times when students will need to be quarantined, and that is what's happening right now. We had students that have to be quarantined. We have teachers that have to be quarantined, administrators that have to be quarantined. It's a reality of the situation, but we want to make sure we're continuing learning. So one of the things that we've done is we've developed toolkits to allow there to be live streaming. So our students first of all, students at the Whiteout will be cohort. So if you're learning at home, so you'll still stay in a cohort group of students who are doing the learning at home instruction. There could be times when students do need to live stream if they are quarantined or from other circumstance. And at the high school, by having live streaming, the students are allowed continuity of their sections, and it also addresses quarantine. If students do need to stay home, they can come in through the live stream and to stay in that class. And so again, as I said at the beginning of this is another change. And so at the beginning, at spring, we had to pivot to emergency learning. And then we had to pivot again to remote learning that was different. And now we're doing another change. And I recognize that this is hard. Change is hard. And I feel like it is, but I feel like we are very capable of adjusting to this change, even though it might feel a little foreign to us. And appreciate everyone's coming to the table willing to be creative with this. Some other things that I know that some people have asked, well, what are other school districts doing? What shouldn't Clayton do what other school districts are doing? And I meet every Wednesday with school districts from across the region and Jefferson County and also St. Charles, and everyone is doing something different. Most of the schools in St. Louis County are doing some type of hybrid, which with a shortened schedule. Some of them are doing all students coming in because maybe they have the space or they're minimizing their social distancing guidelines. We are staying at 6 feet. The other thing is that some schools are just doing 5 days full time, and some are staying in remote learning. So it is different across the region. In our neighbors, in this area, most are going to be doing some type of hybrid model where students are coming for part of the time and then learning part of the time at home. So some benefits is that having this model allows us to have more student interaction with their teachers, more interaction with one another. It's consistent. It's every day. Students are able to come in. We've tried to still maintain minimizing transitions by only having 4 classes a day. The other thing too is important to know is that we had different models that we were presenting through this over the last couple of weeks. And we did meet with leadership teams from both Wydown and the high school. And during those times, we've got feedback from teacher leaders who have said, no, this is not going to work, or have you thought of this? And we've made major adjustments based off that input that we got from them. The other challenges, though, that we still have is that people are still anxious about this, and we have to acknowledge that anxiety and fear. And we have to try to quell it as much as possible by putting everything in place. The transportation at midday is a challenge. Right now, we have bus services for students who already get bus services, but we also know we have some other circumstances, and we're trying to be creative around what we could do to support families in different ways. There are some unknowns. When we started elementary, back to learning, and there were some things we didn't realize we needed to do until we actually started having kids in place. And we've had to make some adjustments, and there's going to be some unknowns at the secondary level as well. The other thing is that it's just another change, and that's hard. So I wanted just to stop there. I just shared a lot of information with you, but I wanted to see what questions the board has or any input or any other thoughts that you think it'd be important for me to be thinking about.
Sean, thank you. Will you stop sharing your screen actually so we can see
Yes.
everybody? Thank you. So first of all, I just want to say thanks to you and your team. I know this is like tireless, very, very challenging work that literally, to your point, changes daily. And so from the time we scheduled this meeting to tonight, it's already a bit of a different frame. So we certainly appreciate that. And so board, I want to give everybody a chance to ask questions. I'm just going to go across and call on you as I see you on my screen, which means that Kim, you are first. Do you have any questions or comments?
None other than I always seem to be first. Sean, I want to echo everything that Joe just said. I know it's incredibly challenging, and it's a moving target that you guys are trying to reasonably put some parameters around every day, and there's just no easy way to do that. You mentioned that there's currently teachers and students that are quarantined. How many teachers and students are currently quarantined in the elementary school?
So, as I said, this is a daily, changes daily. And so right now we had one of our classes at the elementary school, we found out right before this meeting, needs to be quarantined. I don't exactly know what the number is of students, but it is, we'll have some students who are quarantined for a presumed case. And then we also will have some teachers that are quarantined, and I don't know the exact number. So we are able to adjust and go back into remote learning for that classroom. But yeah, that's the reality is that we have, it's going to be over 15 students and probably 2 teachers.
And is that based on a primary or a secondary infection? I guess that's kind of my next question is, are we providing guidance for families in the community as far as like contact tracing and testing? or quarantine isolation in place, you know, when there is a teacher or there's a student in the class that contracts COVID-19? Because I know during last week's board meeting, you guys talked about how you're tracking cases. I know that cases are being reported to you directly by families, in some cases by third parties that are reporting to the school district. Do you have guidance, or as a board, can we together with you guys provide guidance to the community as far as what the protocols are, or the you know, the recommendations are for that kind of contract tracing and how those decisions are being made?
Yeah, Robin, do you want to give a little bit of an overview, since we've just had that today? You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so Kim, those are great questions. And really, the main piece is that it is evaluated case by case, and it's based on the information that we get from the Department of Public Health. So based on the information that we provide to the Department of Public Health, again, and that starts with the information that a family self-reports to us or other information that we receive, and every family is coming to us with a slightly different situation. So then the Department of Public Health gives us a set of directions to follow in terms of who should be quarantined and for how long, and then kind of what are the different pivot points for how we would adjust return dates based on the different circumstances for each situation. So we actually haven't had the exact same situation happen twice. Every situation has had slightly different circumstances, but we do have plans in place for what happens when the Department of Public Health gives us the directives around who should get quarantined, and then all the different action steps that get set off into motion in terms of who gets contacted first, you know, both adults involved and students involved, and then who's like kind of the next tier out, who needs to know that they were not a close contact, but that it may have happened in their building, and then it goes from there. So, and so in certain situations, we are able to get a hold of parents right away and then follow up with written communication. But every case we've dealt with so far, each one has been very different from the other one. So we haven't been able to follow the exact same steps for each one, but it does involve a lot of internal communication and then getting out to the buildings to make sure spaces are properly sanitized, that we make sure that we've gone through and talked about all the possible different adults who were involved, and then how are the children impacted.
And then Chris, do you want to talk a little bit about that communication that gets sent out?
Yeah, sure thing. Oh, there we go. There was a lag in my camera. I apologize. So yeah, so Heather Chrisman, our nurse coordinator, and I work very closely with all of these. And just to kind of follow up on what Robin said, the health department really has not been wanting to give us any blanket guidance or just prescriptive guidelines that we can apply on, you know, we can apply across the board to these, and have been insisting that everything needs to be evaluated on a case-by-case basis. But that said, every time we do have a case, we come to them with a certain set of circumstances. We learn a little more about, you know, about what their thinking is. And we're learning more and more. The more often we're going back to them, is that they tend to lean towards being very conservative with issuing their quarantine guidance for people, for teachers and for students that are exposed to positive cases with, you know, and today's being a great example is this is actually still just even a presumptive positive case that we're dealing with at one of our elementary schools. But we're still asking students. So I believe the number is 17 students, and right at this point, 2 staff members to quarantine until we get some additional information for testing from the individual involved. But we have communication that goes out kind of on 4 different levels. So the first thing that happens is once we've completed contact tracing, Heather Chrisman, our nurse coordinator, contacts any families of students and any staff members who have been identified as close contact or people who have had exposure and need to quarantine. Once we have completed that process, then we do, as we said, when this whole COVID process starts, we follow up with all of the families in that school, just kind of with a general notice to let them know that, yes, we do have there is a positive student or staff member in their building, and kind of remind them of what are the different signs and symptoms and things that they need to look for. And then we go through that same process with our staff in that building as well.
Kim, did you have some input or some ideas that you want us to consider or as part of that?
I mean, I think that, it sounds like we're kind of building the boat while we're already swimming in the water, which totally normal. It's the first time with the pandemic. I guess I'd have to give it a little bit of thought. But in the absence of getting kind of prescriptive guidance from the health department, which is what it sounds like, and then erring on the side of caution, I mean, I don't know if it makes sense maybe to come up with a guideline that if it's a presumptive positive, you stay home and you quarantine for X number of days. Once it's the confirmed positive, then the quarantine extends to 14 days or whatever the latest thinking is. I mean, it might be worth kind of at least quantifying what we know now and putting it out there, because I think it would also help inform our community when the time comes, if the time actually comes that we're going to be extending in-person learning on November 9th, as to whether or not they choose that option. Because as the case numbers have gone up, as you've indicated, and as plans may change, I think that I can confirm that there are families that have reached out to me that initially were very excited. This is just a week ago that you put out the announcement that there was an opportunity for their children to be back in the building, that are now, that excitement has definitely been tempered. And so I think, again, I don't think there's too much information that we can put out about this if we have it. And the more transparent we can be, even if the transparency is, this is what we know now, we know it's probably not as much as you hoped we would know, but these are the guidelines that we have put together kind of for ourselves and that we're following. And as we know more, we'll share more. I think that would probably be good. Because either way that the final decision is made, I think that the more we get out there, the more the decision's going to be accepted no matter what. So that's kind of all I would say.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Kim. Stacy, you're next. Do you have any questions, comments?
I do, thanks. And thank you again, Sean, for your presentation and for all your work on this. It's super complicated. And so I appreciate all your time and effort on this. I just have a couple questions about, are we trying to, in the plan where it's a morning and an afternoon, are we trying to sanitize the building in those, like in that half hour in between? I just started thinking about, in the summer, we talked about the hybrid plan being alternating full days. And now that we're doing morning afternoon shifts, is there going to be an effort to sanitize the buildings between the groups? And is that enough time to do so?
So part of the process is that the building is going to be clean throughout the day. We have more custodians that are down in the building, but also everyone's going to take, everyone's going to have a part in cleaning the spaces. So as part of the process is that after one class leaves, teachers going to be spraying all the desks with our new sanitizers that are our cleaners that are going to clean the desk within 15 seconds, I think. And then students are having to come in and wipe the desk off before they sit down. And so it is going to be like everyone's going to have some responsibility in helping with this. Throughout the day, we'll be going through cleaning doorknobs, cleaning door handles, cleaning different areas to keep people, handrails. But yeah, it's not going to go through like a deep clean process in between the classes, but we are having cleaning happen between each class.
Okay, thanks. Also, are families committed to their decisions that they made previously? Like if someone had chosen that they wanted remote or they wanted, the hybrid plan, responsive learning, but they feel like virtual learning's been going great for their kid, they don't want to go back, can they choose to do so?
Yeah, and I apologize, I forgot to mention that in my presentation. Yes, people, like we did for elementary, the middle school and high school are going to get that option to switch their classes, if they switch from responsive to learning at home. We are being upfront, there are consequences to that. So like if it's easier for students to go into learning at home at the high school level, but it's going to be more difficult for them to come back. And so they might have to switch classes. And so we are trying to be upfront with people, knowing that there are consequences to some of those changes.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, I have a couple more questions.
Okay.
You mentioned about like that our neighboring districts have chosen all different types of hybrid learning, and some are full-time in person, and some have decided full virtual, like Maplewood, Richmond Heights, our neighbor, for instance, I know announced that. And I'm just wondering, I don't want to make any assumptions about why any district chose one way over the other, but it does give me pause to think this district that's also small right next to us chose to remain virtual through January. Do you think that was data driven or are there other extenuating circumstances why they don't feel ready to be back in person?
Yeah, I would say that all the superintendents are using data to make decisions, but every community is different, and leadership's different, and how they make decisions, and so and also circumstances within buildings and how resources are used. So it's different in all those different spaces.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I think it's unique.
Do you have a date, since like you did mention that we talked about that the data, even the last few days, has been trending up. Do you have a date where you feel like you want to make the final decision if we're going to go back on November 9th or not?
Yeah, my feeling right now is that I need to give people a week's notice in order to make so they can make those changes. And so if I'm continuing to see this trend up on November 2nd, we're seeing those trends, I might make the decision on that. I'm planning on that date to make the decision to make a change if I need to. That gives people enough time to make the change. And we're also being conscientious about what changes we need to make with scheduling and Power School and those kinds of things up until that point, because we don't want to make a bunch of changes now if we don't need to make those changes. And so, and the other thing too is that if we make that decision, it'll probably be for the rest of the semester, because I'm having a hard time thinking about people starting on November 30th and then only having a few weeks, and then we have to go do finals. And I just feel like that's too much. Mm-hmm. And so I would then utilize that time to figure out what we're doing for second semester.
Right.
But I'm still remaining hopeful, but November 2nd is the day that I'm hoping to make that decision.
Yeah, that makes sense. And one more question. I appreciate how you did mention that you're like trying to help with transportation in the middle of the day for maybe kids that are going in the morning, like at the high school, but have sports in the afternoon and they can stay. I'm wondering if there's been any thought given to those kids, though, that are the opposite, that need to be at school at noon. They don't normally ride a bus, and their parents are working, they can't get there. And a lot of these kids might even be our own teachers' kids who they are at work for us. And so have you considered, at least for those board grant kids, maybe helping out our teachers? I just feel like I feel like we need to be as supportive of our teachers as we can. And this is one case where I do worry that it's an extra stress on them if they can't get their kids to school at noon because they're teaching for us.
Yeah, so we are exploring options and ideas. And so we do have some ideas that we're looking at to help support not only our board grant students, but also looking at maybe, there's families that have, they're in positions where they're both doctors and they have to be there. And everyone has different circumstances. And so, but we know we can't accommodate everyone's special circumstance. So that's the problem, like developing the criteria for accommodating those. And we're trying to be as creative as possible. It might mean utilizing a different space in the community. And so we're trying to be thoughtful about that. And speaking of spaces, the other thing too is that I didn't mention is that we are trying to get students outside when we can. And like an example would be Whiteown's trying to turn part of their parking garage into outdoor spaces. So we're trying to support them and so it's covered and so looking at different ways to get kids outside more.
Great, thank you. And just one more final question, which isn't really about this plan, but I know we talked about in the beginning of the school year that we were, I think Robin maybe, and her team were connecting with those families where students hadn't yet connected and been online have we at this point been able to reach all of those kids and figure out why and help them and offer support by either bringing them into school or whatever supports they might need at home so that all of our kids now are connected with learning?
Yeah, so Robin we did send out a panorama survey just to get some additional input from students in terms of how they're feeling. But then we also got some input from teachers and administrators about who hasn't been connecting, who maybe has had some, maybe is not performing well or not signing on. And so we have been able to reach out to those students and be able to bring some of them in to support them. And so, Robin, I don't know if you want to add anything to that, but we've been trying to be as thoughtful as possible for looking at every situation.
Yes, and each of the building leadership teams was closely monitoring student engagement, and were able to develop different scenarios to have some students come on site to do their online learning. And so that made a huge difference. Our social workers have also been doing a huge number of home visits, both on the porch and inside, to help families get their forms completed, to make sure that the hotspots are working. We've been doing a variety of drop-offs too, through facilities and through student services, making sure some of our families who are in transitional housing have been getting access to the school supplies, again, the technology devices, the hotspots, meal drop-offs. So we've been able to do a lot more physical outreach this go round than we did in the spring, because there's no stay-at-home order. And all of our teams too, going into this, knew what to look for, what were the signs for struggles related to online engagement. And so we've been able to create a lot of different supports at all of the buildings to help support those students. Some of them are coming on site simply because they needed the Wi-Fi support. Some students are coming on because they were having a hard time following, the directions, or finding all the things online they needed to. All they needed was some additional adult supervision. And so we've been able to work with families or offer it to families. Some families declined because they, have different circumstances that would make it very difficult to have a student on site for, a lot of different reasons, but we've been able to support them in different ways. We have tutors who are working with students virtually. We have interns working with students in person. So we were able to ramp up a lot of different kinds of support than we were in the spring.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. That's all.
Thanks, Stacy. Jason, any comments or questions?
Yeah, well, I don't really have any comments. Questions, honestly. This is a statement more so, or more or less. But such a moving target, Sean, as you know. Number one, you all are doing a great job of trying to play the moving target game. I think this is a complicated process. And, my personal view is we're going to support you and the staff no matter what. However, I do think that, it just seems simpler just to wait till the second semester and really focus on planning. But I totally understand all the things that you're weighing and that you're trying to capture and bringing kids back to school. So I get that. So I do applaud you for trying at least. And I have 1,000 questions, but I don't think it would even really be at this point in time helpful. Let's just roll with it. We're going to support you, and let's make it happen.
And I appreciate that, Jason. And the thing that I would say too is that the efforts that if we do have to pivot again and stay in remote, these efforts are not for naught. We eventually are coming back to school, and so we're getting ourselves prepared. So if it's not now, then later on. So I appreciate that support if we need to be back.
Yeah,
if we need
absolutely.
To be
Absolutely. Thank you, man. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Jason. David, any questions, comments?
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Sean, I just a couple of just added thoughts to a couple of other comments, and then some feedback, and as well as a question. So in no particular order. I think so. I had a chance to connect with a few families, both with kids and that had shifted to private school, as well as some that are still with us. And there was a common theme across them, is that I think that while occasionally we talk about it, it was hard to quantify or anticipate what the change in attitude behavior, overall kind of, you know, outwardly expressed health, if you will, of the kids, you know, the benefit of being around other kids. You know, it's hard. I'm not articulating that well at all, but basically the consensus was, holy cow, we didn't really anticipate that big of a shift in behavior change when our kids got back around other kids in a classroom environment. You know, everyone kind of expected it would be a big difference. And, you know, I know some parents had struggles over the last, you know, 4 or 5 months with their kids being at home and kind of being isolated from friends. And, but it was just apparently overwhelming. You know, we're even seeing it in our first grader. You know, he's just a light bulb. Just, you know, even though what they get to do at school is vastly different than it would have been a year ago, it's just I don't know, it just kind of affirms to me that the decisions you're making are you know, are in the best interest of the kids, even though they may not be popular with, you know, with some of the family and staff, because I know it's a scary time. But just if the outside shine is any indication of what's going on inside, I think we're doing the right thing. So thank you for that. I wanted to touch a little bit on, Kim went down the path and kind of cleared a lot of the questions I had around the contact tracing and the approach and the classification. You know, my thought is in the absence of guidance from our government, which is phenomenal, I guess, you know, sarcasm. I think it would be good if we could somehow pull together a loose bit of framework for families to at least look to. I hesitate to ask because I know it's going to be a moving target. And I think you illustrated that well by saying every time you guys talk to the county health department, the guidance changes, you know, because there's just little tweaks of the situation. But even if there's some base level foundation guidance we can put out there, I think it would help, because right now, a lot of folks are going off of what they read on Yahoo, you know, or some other rando website. And, you know, we need to have some base foundation there. You know, I can say from personal experience, you know, we've seen what some families would classify as a secondary exposure, which is really kind of not, you know, because it's more of a close contact secondary. I mean, if it's in your household, it really is kind of still a primary exposure. And, you know, those things can turn into go from minor to serious in a heartbeat. And I think, you know, we've got to take that into consideration with our class and our contact tracing and what our exposure plans are. I mean, I've got a 3rd grader right now walking around the house with a mask on, so he's not very excited about that, but it's what we do, and you know, he's taken it in stride. But I'd like to think that we can help families get clarity around what we consider primary versus secondary with respect to classroom operations and quarantine. You know, and then those are just my continuing comments. The question I've got, you know, you and I have talked about this, and I apologize, it probably just didn't sink in. So we made a change in software package, right? So we're to be able to do synchronous classroom delivery at the same time during lecture. Am I understanding that correctly? We're not just using we would not be using Zoom in like the secondary classrooms. Is that fair?
No, we would still be, it's not a software change. It's still using Zoom, but we had different toolkits that we put together. So for example, we needed to make sure that we had the right microphones for teachers with an earpiece so that they can talk to the students at home at the same time of being able to talk with the kids in the classroom.
Gotcha.
And then it's also, then that way it could be better amplified for the students at home.
Yeah.
The other thing is that we have the iPads that are basically cameras that can be adjustable and be able to be a tool to record and to film the students,
Okay.
film the instruction in the class. So we're still using Zoom. We're still going to use Google Classroom, but it's not going to software change. But we're using some different hardware to make that happen.
Oh, okay. No, okay, that makes sense. That's good for me to understand. I mean, my feeling is, you know, and it's not just teachers today, right? You know, I would imagine most of us that work in different industries, we're seeing that our staff are all having to learn new skills and adapt to an unusual situation. So I think it's just the way of the world that we live in right now, that, we have to kind of, pull up our bootstraps and learn new skills when, we're not necessarily as comfortable as we were a year ago. But a wise man once told me that if there's anybody that can learn new skills, it's teachers. So I'm optimistic that we'll be able to knock it out of the park with a little bit of practice and maybe some speed bumps along the way. But to echo Jason's comments, if there's anything I can do to help support you, just reach out. Thank you for the update.
No problem. And I will just echo what you just said about the teachers. I mean, our teachers have pivoted so many times over this last year. It's incredible. And I'm really, truly grateful for all that they've done. Our teachers, and I'm just saying, we have really high quality teachers who are constantly, what I would say is this whatever it takes kind of attitude. I think it's unique to us.
Thank you, David. Gary, any comments or questions?
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Really quickly, I just want to share one anecdote that maybe underlines a little bit of what David was saying as far as the efforts that we've made so far to get some kids back on campus, the impact that it's having. I know I had a minute to take a walk through the neighborhood the other day at a time, kind of late afternoon, when there were some kids playing on the playground at Captain, and it was literally the first time that I had heard or seen that in 7 months. And while it did sort of create a pit in my stomach, because I'm now accustomed to thinking, wait, they're not supposed to be doing that, it was also like the most normal sound I had heard in a really long time. So they were all wearing masks, and it was a different scene, but I'm sure everybody in all the neighborhoods can appreciate that little bit of normalcy. Sean, I think it was really helpful when you talked about the specific data points that you're looking at. I know we can't give hard and fast, when this number gets to this point, we will do whatever it is we're thinking about. But unfortunately, because even if you say things like the health department guidance or the CDC guidance, people are able to, and unfortunately all too willing, to take those general references to support whatever they wanted to support throughout all levels of government and society. I think it might be more helpful if you communicate the way you did tonight, but maybe in a little bit of a condensed form, the specific things that you are looking at regularly. And again, you can't say when this number gets to X, we do Y, but talking about that positivity per 100,000, talking about that, or that case per 100,000, and that the different age groups and the overall county positivity rate, talking about what's the difference between 15 to 19 and 15 to 17, just sharing the things that you're looking at. I think the more we can talk about that, the better, just in terms of just be easier for everyone to process it. So I would just encourage that. The other comment, or I don't know if it's really a question, but maybe just something for you to think about. If we do in fact have to push back, I was wondering the same thing as far as how long that would go and if it would just take us to the end of the semester. But if we do that, are there things that are not regular class, daily classes, that could start to happen more in person, that would be, it would allow some additional socialization and interaction with peers without moving the entire schedule back into the building? And is that something that we would be able to, maybe implement somewhat yet, even this semester? I don't know if that's something that you're able to process at this point. I'd certainly understood if you're not, but just something that was on my mind.
No, I think that's a good question, something for us to consider. I think it would tie into some of the things we've already done to try to get kids in the building. And I think that that's something we could consider. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Gary. Amy, comments or questions?
Most people have kind of touched on everything that I had on my list, so that's great, thank you. The one thing I'll kind of add on to what Sean said, and I think Stacy too, about the teachers, and Sean mentioned the fact that we do have super high quality teachers. And I would love to get some follow-up information on, I guess some of the more specifics on how we're supporting them, and making sure that it feels like this could be an opportunity for us to really be a leader and come up with some creative solutions on how to support them. I know it isn't easy, and we're trying to juggle 10 million different balls, but I think since we do have such high quality teachers, and we want to retain them, we want to make sure that we're being as accommodating as we can and taking them into consideration, especially how their kids are going to get to school and whatever else their needs might be too. So that would be my only comment. I guess I was also curious on how the kids are doing that don't speak English.
So I wouldn't be able to answer that one right now. That's something I could follow up on and get some additional information. We can check in with our EL teachers and get some additional information on that.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Amy. And I think everybody's asked great questions. I really don't have any questions that really haven't been asked. I guess the only one maybe that I just want to make sure that I've heard out in the community, I just want to confirm that even based on this data, there's not a change in plan to kind of fully implement the elementary going back to school as of this Monday. I just want to kind of, but we're not going to do anything. We're not going to do anything different with our elementary. It's not like we're pulling back our elementary, right?
Not at this point. We will definitely keep looking at those numbers at that age group, but not at this point. We're not pulling back elementary. We're going to move forward with our plan for Monday with the 3rd through 5th grade.
Great, thank you. All right, well, again, thank you, Sean, to you and your team. We really appreciate it. This is, I know, again, literally changing every day. We can't emphasize that enough, but we really appreciate it. So I think we just need a motion to adjourn, although it's a motion to adjourn to executive session.
All right, thanks, Joe. I move that the Board of Education adjourn the working session and that pursuant to RSMO 610.021 subparagraphs 3 and 13, the Board of Education meets in executive session for discussion related to personnel issues.
Second.
All right, it's been moved and seconded, so we need a roll call vote, vote, excuse me, for this, Gary.
All right, Amy.
Yep.
Jason.
Yes.
Stacy.
Yes.
David.
Yes.
Kim.
Yes.
Gary, yes. Joe.
Yes. Okay, we're
Right.
adjourning to executive session. So, and just a reminder, right, it's a different link. So everybody will have to get off this link and then go to the other link. So thank you all again.